I was born in Anaheim. My wife was born in Los Angeles. I don't recall either of us getting extra benefits because of where we were born. It would be nice if Disneyland granted every child born in a city of its theme park a one-day pass, but alas, that does not happen. The only thing our parents got for being born in the city of our origin was a hospital bill. It's the same story for all of us. Our birth city, for the most part, doesn't really matter. But what about Jesus? He was born in Bethlehem. Does that matter? Much of the significance centers around what Bethlehem was historically leading up to Jesus' birth. Bethlehem may not have been the biggest city, but its importance to Jews is significant. Its name means house of bread in Hebrew, and it is mentioned nearly 30 times in the Old Testament. The name alone seems fitting for the birth of someone who will be the bread of life. But it's not just the name that makes it the ideal place for his birth. Bethlehem is the place where Rachel died. It is also the setting of one of the Bible's rare love stories, that of Ruth and Boaz. More notably to the Jewish audience, however, Bethlehem is the birthplace of Judaism's greatest king, David. David began the Jewish rule which ultimately collapses. Jesus was the rightful king to reestablish that rule. He is the one the prophets said would come. But he didn't come as a ruler who would bring physical war. He came as a ruler who would unleash spiritual war on people. So while there are no fringe benefits to being born in a city, it's going to matter to the Jewish audience. They're looking for the fulfillment of prophecy, and Jesus being born in Bethlehem helps shape that. I think most of us have an image of a hotel when we think about the inn that Mary and Joseph arrived at. We picture them pulling up to a Motel 6 with the no vacancy sign on. It wasn't quite that exotic. It was, in fact, several steps down from that. Perhaps you're thinking, what could possibly be a step down from Motel 6? Basically, the easiest thing to do is forget everything you know about an inn. In Jesus' day, the inn was more of a campground for people to roll up their caravans in. More upscale inns also had fancy two-story enclosed facilities, but even these were the type of places that made hostels look like Ritz-Carltons. The people who showed up in inns were not the best company, and the people who took caravans usually had a bad reputation. As you might expect, they were not the safest places to sleep, and theft was a pretty common problem. What you have to wonder, knowing all this, is if Mary and Joseph were really seeking to stay at the inn because the word could also be translated as guest room. Most out-of-counters stayed with a relative in the guest house, not in the traditional inn. So when you read there was no room at the inn, there's a better chance that they have shown up at a relative's house only to be told there was no room for them. When you think about it like this, when you think about the relative who is rejecting him, the picture becomes more clear. It probably wasn't a case of there being no room in the guest house. If there really was no room, don't you think they would have made room for a pregnant woman? This was a relative after all. I think the more realistic situation was not that there was no room at the house, rather there was no room for Mary. No room for the sinner who was carrying what the relatives considered to be an illegitimate child. The thing we often miss with the nativity story is the sheer amount of rejection Mary likely faced. Today, having a child outside of marriage isn't exactly ideal, but people don't slam doors on your face. In fact, most people are compassionate to the situation. This wasn't the case then. People shunned these types of people, and the person reading the gospel hundreds of years ago probably understood this message much more clearly than we do today. So there's no room at the inn, no spare bedroom at the guest house, and they end up at the manger. What isn't in the Christmas pageants, however, was the manger might have in fact been at the relative's home. Perhaps a relative rejected Mary for her unfaithfulness, but it wasn't so cold to send her away entirely. So to be the kind relative, they just sent her to give birth with the animals. Most homes back then had an upper and lower level. The upper level was where the family stayed, the living quarters. The lower level was where the animals are kept. If the house was extra nice, then the animal quarters would be divided. One side for the animals, and one side the people who cared for the animals could sleep in. If this was the arrangement, then Mary could have been in the sleeping area of the manger when she gave birth, and Joseph, who was obviously good with wood, would be next door in the manger making a cradle out of the materials he found there. The fact that they are in a manger probably also benefited the shepherds. It narrowed their search for Jesus from several homes to just a few. It's easy to see the manger as a poor baby Jesus type story. I don't think that's the intention of the author. I don't think he's trying to get you to pity Jesus. It is true that nobody should have to be born in these conditions. But the bigger truth being revealed here by the author is something about the parents. It reveals that they are poor and really need to rely on the kindness of others to survive. That's a lesson that Jesus no doubt will carry with him for his entire life. What would Jesus' message to believers be if his parents had been a little more wealthy? If they didn't have to rely on family? Jesus' story from the very birth is one that you need others to survive. His birth taught Jesus, and it teaches us that we aren't in this life alone. It's a lot better when we have a circle of family, not family in the literal sense, but a family of believers who we can rely on for support. Perhaps when Jesus got older, he was asked about his birth story, and he learned what happened. But I don't picture Mary and Joseph telling how happy they were with the situation. I imagine them telling him that we should always be thankful for the support that we get. I don't think they were bitter towards relatives who couldn't make room for them. I think they loved them all the same. And this was the parents that raised Jesus, that taught him right from wrong.